You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. You know, I did do a Schiff Gold podcast, Friday market wrap on my Schiff Gold YouTube channel. Many of you may not know about that channel because it's only got about 18,000 subscribers. So if you're not subscribing to the channel, you should do that so you know when I post one of these. I'm trying to do them every Friday just to focus on the gold market. Although almost 50,000 people have watched the video, which is about triple the number of subscribers. So people are finding out about it, even though they're not subscribing. But it's probably a good idea if you subscribe to the channel. But I want to start off today's podcast also talking about gold, because gold is one of the big stories of the week. In fact, it's one of the big stories of the month, because Friday was the last day of the month, trading wise. I mean, in fact, we're still in August, right? It's the 30 today, 31st. But by the time the market reopens on Tuesday, we're in September, and so the month of August is over, and gold closed at not only its highest price ever, but it was the highest close on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Gold, I think, is finally getting ready for the next leg up. In fact, it probably started that leg up on Friday by going through the highs. But now I think we've got clear sailing to get up to 3,500. I think we'll pass that relatively quickly. In fact, I'll take a look at where we're trading right now. Early Sunday evening. So Asian trading is just kind of kicked off. And in the gold market, let me pull that up. Yeah, no, gold's down about 90 cents, 3,448. A few minutes ago, it was trading above 34.50. Silver also on Friday. Silver closed at a 13-year high. We came within 10 cents of $40. Right now, we're trading at 39.72, which is up about a dime from where we closed on Friday. But both gold and silver looking very strong, technically, fundamentally. The dollar was also weak on the week. Dollar index closed back below 98, about 97.80. So weakness in the dollar also working to help the gold market. But I think there are major, fundamental stories that are going to be fueling this gold market rally. One of them is the drama that's now playing out in the courts regarding Trump's tariffs. Now, I talked about this on my podcast that I expected the appellate court, which heard arguments on the constitutionality of these tariffs on bank. And Friday, after the markets closed, the ruling came out where the appellate court, in a 7-4 decision, and I don't know what those other 4 dissenters were smoking, but they clearly, don't understand the Constitution. But at least 7 of these appellate court justices do, at least, this aspect of it, which is pretty straightforward. But they supported the lower court, the district court ruling that the tariffs are unconstitutional, which they clearly are. In fact, on the very day that Trump unveiled these reciprocal tariffs, I came on my podcast and I said they were unconstitutional. There is no way that the Trump administration has the authority to do this. And this is one of the things that particularly bothers me about the Trump administration is the fact that they don't care about the Constitution, right? Because a lot of people may have voted for Trump because they were, Tea Party Republicans, who, support the Constitution. That was one of the reasons that we formed the Tea Party, right? Because of so many things were unconstitutional. You had a lot of patriots that wanted the government to abide by the Constitution, and they think Donald Trump is going to be a champion of the Constitution. But so much of what Donald Trump is doing is unconstitutional. He's trying to massively expand not just the power of the federal government well beyond its constitutional limitations, but he specifically wants to expand the power of the executive. And I pointed this out, and at least the Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court, the appellate court recognizes this. And, and I read through the decision, and one of the things that they pointed to was the arguments that the framers had regarding the limits of presidential power. And there were people that thought, well, maybe the president has too much power. And one of the arguments that the president didn't was because the power of the purse rested in Congress. And most specifically, in the House of Representatives, because all tax bills needed to originate in the House. And again, the reason the founding fathers wanted taxes to start in the House was the House was the most responsive body to the people. The senators were appointed by the state legislatures, and they served 6-year terms. So they weren't as responsive. They didn't really have to answer to the people by design. That was part of the checks and balances, what that the founders wanted. They didn't want the senators and the House elected by the people. We had one House elected by the people. But that is the House of Congress that the founders said that's where taxes have to start. Because the one thing they knew would piss people off would be taxes. And so they thought that of, the members of Congress, the ones least likely to want to raise taxes on the people are the ones that have to face re-election by the people every 2 years. And that was supposed to be a big check on presidential power because, yes, the president might want to do stuff, but the power of the purse, right, the ability to pay for the stuff that the president wants to do lies exclusively in the Congress, and it must originate in the House of Representatives, which is beholden to the people. And so the justices and the appeals court pointed to those conversations and said clearly tariffs are a tax. There's no doubt that tariffs are a tax. And taxes, the power to tax, rests exclusively with the Congress. It's in the legislative branch of government. It's not in the executive. And they pointed out that the Trump administration tried to argue that the power to regulate includes the power to tax, which is BS. And I hate to see the Trump administration arguing to distort the Constitution to try to justify an unconstitutional power grab. That's the kind of stuff that the Democrats do. The Republicans are supposed to be for original construction, right? It's not a living, breathing document that just changes with the times. The Republicans are supposed to be the party that wants original intent, right? The Constitution means what it says, not what activist judges want to pretend. And what really bothers me is you get all these members now of the Trump administration attacking these justices, saying, "Oh, these are activist justices. They're not appointed by Trump. They're being political." No, they're not. Trump is the one that's being political. The justices are applying the Constitution, which is exactly what they should do. It's those 4 dissenters that are being political. Those are the ones that are trying to justify, distorting the Constitution to authorize unconstitutional actions by the Trump administration. I mean, one of the reasons that we have such a big government right now is because the court did this. The court allowed all these government programs to pass and didn't enforce the Constitution. This started, with Roosevelt when he stacked the Supreme Court and got all these guys, that would uphold all the unconstitutional New Deal programs. And so, seeing the Trump administration saying the same type of stuff at the Roosevelt administration, right, and trying to get all this unconstitutional stuff passed, it's very frustrating that this is happening. But clearly, the power to regulate is not the power to tax. Regulating and taxing are two completely different things. Just because you can regulate doesn't mean you can tax, right? Because otherwise, what would be the point of having two separate words? They wouldn't have regulation powers and then taxation powers listed separately if they just one included the other, but obviously they don't. A regulation doesn't raise revenue. A regulation basically sets up a framework. This is how something has to happen. These are the rules that you have to follow, right? It's not a revenue raising. Taxes are meant to raise revenue, right? And that's what the tariffs are doing. They're raising revenue, right? Trump is bragging about all the revenue that he's raising from these tariffs. Yes, that's the point of a tariff. It raises revenue. It is a tax, and all taxes have to originate in the House of Representatives. They cannot be enacted by presidential decree. The president is not a king. He cannot tax the people. The people have to tax themselves through their elected congressional representatives. Now, you might say, well, Trump was elected. Well, but not as responsive as all these congressmen in the House every 2 years in these districts that are extremely close to the people. And remember, the president is elected by the Electoral College. It's not even supposedly directly by the people. But the court got this right. The Trump administration is completely wrong. Very frustrating to me to see this. And of course, they want to appeal it to the Supreme Court. Now, I don't even think the Supreme Court needs to hear the case because it's so obvious that the 7 justices got it right. But maybe they'll hear it anyway, just to send a message loud and clear that the president can impose tariffs. And he can't change the meaning of words. He can't, say that he's reciprocating against non-existent tariffs by making up some BS and saying we're reciprocating against that when he doesn't have the authority. He can't just declare a phony emergency and claim he has the power to impose these tariffs because there's a fentanyl emergency or because we have a trade deficit emergency. This is all a bunch of BS. But again, it seems like it's par for the course in the Trump administration where you have absolutely no regard for the Constitution, the rule of law, or even economics. And I've talked about that where Donald Trump wants to micromanage the economy. He wants to, pick winners and losers. He wants to control things. And he wants to, take stakes in companies, whether, through investment or just through coercion. But all this stuff that he is doing, it's not only anti-Constitution, it's anti-freedom, it's anti-free markets and capitalism. But unfortunately, nobody in the Republican Party, maybe except for Rand Paul and maybe a couple of others, but nobody is challenging him. All these Republicans are losing all their credibility, and the ones in the media, because when the Democrats try to do the same thing, when they try to pass stuff that's unconstitutional, they have no credibility to say anything. Because if you're not going to criticize Trump when he wants to cram an unconstitutional tax, through the courts, then how are you going to have any credibility when the Democrats want to do the same thing? And now you say, well, the Constitution, they can't do that. Well, why didn't you object when Trump was doing it? I don't like all of this hypocrisy in partisan politics, as if you're a Republican, then a Republican can do no wrong. And if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, the Democrats can do no right. Now, in many cases, that's not even a false statement. They rarely do anything right. But in this case, They are, right? Because they're opposing what Trump wants to do. Now, of course, if Biden was doing it, they'd probably support it. That's the problem. Everybody just supports their guy, like they root for their team, and they forget that we all supposed to be on the same team, which is the country and the Constitution. And if a president of your party wants to violate the Constitution, you're supposed to be critical of that violation. Anyway, we got a quick commercial break. Stick around. We're coming right back. It can be hard to talk about not being able to get hard, but HIMSS is here to make things much easier. Their all-online process connects you with a licensed healthcare provider who can recommend personalized ED treatments from the comfort of home. Get a boost in and out of the bedroom with access to personalized treatments, including daily options for more spontaneous sex. Through HIMSS, you can access personalized prescription treatments for ED like hard mints and Sex RX Plus Climax Control. HIMSS offers access to ED treatment options that cost 95% less than brand names. New Sex RX Plus testosterone support includes tadalafil for better bedroom performance and zinc for testosterone support. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMSS can help find the ED option that works for you if appropriate. Just fill out an intake form on their site and connect with a medical provider who can determine if treatment is right for you. The process is 100% online, which means no office visits and no pharmacy lines. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. If prescribed, your medicine ships discreetly to your door for free. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/gold. Find ED treatment that's up to 95% less than brand names at hims, HIMS.com/gold. hims.com/gold. Actual price will depend on product and subscription plans. Featured products include compounded drug products, which the FDA does not approve or verify for safety, efficacy, or quality. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. All right. Now, this news about the court decision came out again after the market closed, so the markets haven't reacted to it. And I think this is a negative development for the dollar. Not that getting rid of the tariffs is a bad thing. It actually would be a good thing because the tariffs are doing harm. But to hear Donald Trump talk, he's saying that America will be destroyed if, these tariffs go away. Well, I mean, America was here before the tariffs. So how are we going to be destroyed if we don't have tariffs when we haven't had tariffs really for decades? But according to Trump, that's the end of America if the courts reject these fantastic tariffs that are supposedly like showering us with free revenue because the rest of the world is paying it and we're not paying anything. It's right, just money coming down from heaven. But the fact of the matter is the tariffs are taxes and they make America less competitive, and they're paid by Americans, not by foreigners. But I think that the reason this is going to be problematic is it introduces a lot more uncertainty into the mix as to these tariffs. Now we have to wait for the Supreme Court because the appellate court did not say that the tariffs have to go away. The tariffs can stay there until the president exhausts his appeals. Now, if the president cared about the Constitution, he wouldn't appeal this, right? His lawyers would say, hey, this is unconstitutional, right? You took an oath, you swore to uphold and defend the Constitution, so you're violating it. But no, I mean, Trump, they made up this BS and they try to claim that they're allowed to do it. But people don't know now whether or not the tariffs are going to go away. So certainly, if there was any business that was thinking about, well, maybe I should onshore something, I mean, I don't think they're going to do it anyway. But even if they were, you can't do anything until the Supreme Court rules because you don't know if the tariffs are going to be declared unconstitutional. So nobody can do anything. Everybody's hands are tied now until we have a Supreme Court decision. But of course, if the Supreme Court upholds the appellate court, which it should, then all of the money that the Trump administration collected in tariffs, all of it has to go back. Everybody's entitled to a refund. So that's also going to be a big problem because, we've somewhat lowered the budget deficits with these tariffs. And Trump has been, claiming credit. Hey, look, yes, we blew up the budget with the big, beautiful bill, but look, we're getting all this tariff money to offset the bigger deficits that we created with the big, beautiful bill. Well, that narrative gets blown up if all the tariff revenue not only stops, but has to be repaid. Now, of course, if you're a consumer and you bought a product and the price was higher because of the tariff, you're just SOL, right? You're not going to get your money back. But if you're an importer and you wrote that check to the government, you get your money back. Now, if you're one of these people who directly, if you bought something directly and you paid the tariffs, yeah, then you would be entitled to a refund. But this is going to be a processing nightmare, right? Having to give everybody back all this money that they collected. And again, the tariffs are still in effect. Even though they've been ruled unconstitutional, people are still paying these unconstitutional tariffs until we get a Supreme Court ruling. Now, if Supreme Court refuses to hear the case, then the ruling stands, right? Then the appellate court, that's it. Because the Supreme Court doesn't grant certiorari, then there's no more appeals. So that would be a quicker end to the stalemate if the Supreme Court doesn't even hear it. But if they decide to hear it, then we have to wait for that decision to come out. But it's uncertainty in the markets, right? And then who knows, like maybe the tariffs are going to be here, maybe they won't be here. So I think all this added uncertainty just undermines the credibility of the administration, of the government. And I think that credibility is a big deal right now. And so I think anything that, smacks of the Trump administration, look, it's a battle between Trump and the courts. They're trying to do stuff that's not legal and they're trying to get around the Constitution. It's not a good look, right? America is supposed to be about the rule of law, and we've got, better property rights, and a lot of that seems to be in jeopardy right now. So I think this is going to be bad for the dollar, which is going to be good for gold. By the way, so gold was up about 2.5% last week, 32% on the year, 32% so far in 2025. Silver was up 3% on the week. It's now up 38% on the year. But the real stars finally are the mining stocks, right? Hitting new 13-year highs today. We're almost at a record high on the GDX, almost. But the GDXJ still has to maybe double to get back to where it was in 2011. But year to date, the GDX is up 86%. 86%. The GDXJ is up 87%. The best performing stock year to date in the S&P 500, the second best performing stock is Newmont Mining, which is almost doubled. It's up like 99% year to date. It is the number 2 stock. I think it's Palantir is the only stock that's beating it, and it's not beating it by much. But I believe that by the end of the year, and probably a lot sooner than that, but the number 1 stock in the S&P 500 for 2025 is going to be Newmont Mining. And it's probably the stock that the fewest Americans own, right? Of all the S&P 500 stock, the ones that the least amount of individuals own is probably Newmont Mining. And that's going to be the best performing stock. I said it on this podcast when Donald Trump gave his first speech as president and announced the golden age in America. I said he's right in a literal sense. It was going to be a golden age for gold. And so far, gold is off to its best start probably of any presidency in history. Trump may not be making America great again, but he's making gold great again, not by intention, but the unintended consequence of his policies, right? He's trying to tout Bitcoin. Bitcoin is only up about 14% on the year, right? Gold is killing it. In fact, Bitcoin is 13% below its peak, right? Clearly, it's not digital gold. Gold's making a new record high. Bitcoin's in a correction. It could easily enter a new bear market pretty soon. And of course, the stock market is, gold stocks are crushing the returns in Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is still today about 13% lower than it was at its peak 4 years ago if you price it in gold. So despite all the hype, all the Bitcoin ETFs, the Bitcoin treasury companies, the strategic Bitcoin reserve, America being the Bitcoin capital of the world with the first Bitcoin president, Bitcoin is still lower than it was before any of that stuff happened. So how is that possible? How can all this good news and all this new buying not drive the price higher? Because there's a lot of people smarter than the people who are buying who have been selling into all the hype. This is a gigantic pump and dump that's going on with Bitcoin. And the big pumpers now are the Trump administration, and all of their friends are the dumpers. But if you're smart, you'll get rid of what Bitcoin you have, and you'll go down to Schiff Gold, where we work with BitPay, and you'll take your Bitcoin and you'll buy some gold or you'll buy some silver. This is a holiday weekend, so the U.S. markets are closed on Monday. I would not be surprised to see silver gap above $40. It never touched $40 in U.S. market hours on Friday. But I would not be surprised to just see silver gap above $40 and just have a big move up on Tuesday. So I would go to Schiff Gold now or tomorrow and get some silver. Don't wait for that big move up, because by the time the ETF buyers have a shot, they could be looking at much higher prices. Same thing with gold. I mean, maybe gold will gap up. I'd love to see gold gap above 3,500. That would be something. That's going to be that's a bigger move, because that's about a $50 move for gold to do that. But there's so much that's going on right now, fundamentally, technically, that would support that kind of breakaway gap in these metals. And it's not just the drama playing out in the court over the tariffs, which are clearly unconstitutional, but what Trump is doing with the Federal Reserve, which is just as bad. And I think the hearing now, because Trump fired Lisa Cook, right? And she's the FOMC governor. He fired her. And the pretense was, she committed mortgage fraud, right? She claimed a second home as a primary residence, right? Which is probably the most common form of mortgage fraud that there is. And a lot of times people have an explanation, I was going to move into that house. Yes. And I had another house, but the house that I bought, I was going to move into that one, and that one was going to be my primary residence, even though I already had a primary residence. I don't know. I mean, whatever it is, it's a very common thing. Millions of people do it. I'm sure many congressmen are now probably worried because they probably did the same thing. But Trump, they find this out, and oh my God, this is terrible. How could you commit mortgage fraud? You're on the Fed, right? The Fed has a lot of influence over the mortgage market because it sets interest rates. We can't have somebody setting interest rates who's guilty of mortgage fraud. You're fired, right? I got cause, right? Because he's allowed to fire a FOMC member for cause. And I went over this on my last podcast, and the attorneys for Lisa Cook, in arguing that the firing was unlawful, basically said the same thing that I did. Now, I'm not saying that they watched my podcast to figure out how to litigate the case, but it's obvious what's going on. In fact, I put it out on my X feed. I said the courts are not going to close their eyes to what's obvious. What is obvious about this is the real reason that Trump wants to fire Lisa Cook because he happened to find out she committed mortgage fraud. No, of course not. Trump is looking for reasons to get rid of FOMC members. Why? Because he wants to replace them with people that will vote the way he wants. Right? He's bashed Powell, threatened to fire Powell. The Fed chairman is a bunch of idiots. They're morons. They should be cutting rates. We need lower rates. How is Trump going to get the FOMC to lower rates? By putting people on the FOMC that will vote to lower rates, even if lower rates are not justified by the fundamentals. But how does he do that, right? He's got to get more people. Now, yes, he's going to get to reappoint Powell, so he's going to get to put somebody there. But the Fed chairman is one vote. It's majority rules at the Fed. And so he needs more FOMC members to vote his way. So he told his people, look for dirt, dig up dirt, see what you can find on these FOMC members that we want to get rid of, and come up with a reason to get rid of them so that we can put our own people in power. That's obviously what's going on. And now that's being argued in court. And of course, and I hear the Trump administration trying to justify this just the way they're trying to justify an unconstitutional tariff by saying that, well, regulate and tax are the same thing. And the president gets to make up an emergency. Whatever he wants is an emergency. And now he's saying whatever he wants is cause. Like when you have the power to fire for cause, it's not because. Trump can't just fire somebody because he wants to and say, well, that's the cause, right? I found something. She has got a 14-year employment contract. Look, if you're an employer and you have an at-will employee and you suspect your employee did something wrong, you can fire them, right? Because they're at will. But if you have a contract and it lays out specific reasons that you could fire them, you just can't fire them. Now, even if Donald Trump believes that what Lisa Cook did constitutes mortgage fraud, and we haven't heard her explanation for it, right? But even if he believes that she committed this mortgage fraud before she was Fed chairman, it's got nothing to do with her performance on the job. And probably, when I don't know, when you are nominated for Fed chairman, what financial disclosures you have to make. I mean, I don't know, maybe Lisa Cook, when she was nominated, maybe she disclosed her mortgages back then. I don't know, but let's say she did. Let's say that in her disclosures were these mortgages and nobody said anything, right? That was the time maybe to look through the applications and find, hey, wait a minute here. How do you have two primary residences? Oh, did you commit mortgage fraud? Maybe we shouldn't, confirm your nomination to the FOMC. I mean, that would have been the time to bring it up. But what the administration argued, not the administration, the lawyers for Cook, is that, look, if all the president needs is to have some excuse, some reason, and say, well, I'm firing you, well, he can fire anybody. He can just make up a reason that he thinks somebody should be fired and then fire him. The reason that they're not at-will employees, right? If it was meant that the president could just fire people because he wants to, because he disagrees with something, they wouldn't have 14-year terms. The reason they have 14-year terms is precisely because presidents can't fire them. The whole idea is that it's apolitical, that they're above the fray, right? They're not going to be beholden to politicians because the presidents are elected to 4-year terms, and these guys are there for 14 years. So it's to create the independence. And so this is, again, we're arguing for destroying Fed independence because Trump is saying that the executive should be able to determine on its own if there's cause to fire somebody. And if it believes it, then fire him. Look, I don't even know if mortgage fraud is grounds. But if it is, at least it's got to be proven in court. You just can't allege it. I mean, who knows? Let's hear her side of the story. I don't know. But she hasn't been convicted. She hasn't even been charged. The Justice Department hasn't filed charges against her. They're just like, oh, we think you committed fraud. Okay. But you can't fire somebody with a 14-year contract, especially when it's obvious the real reason. Trump is trying to fire her for political reasons. If she had been voting to cut interest rates, none of this would have come up, right? The only people that they're looking into, I'm sure, are the ones that voted not to cut interest rates. Because last time, I think there were 3 guys or 2 or 3 guys that voted to cut. So their jobs are safe, right? They're not looking to dig up dirt on those guys. But they're looking to remove the opposition. And for that reason alone, even if I thought there was cause, I would say, no, you can't fire them because we know what you're really trying to do. You're trying to take over the Fed. You're trying to hijack the Fed, and you're looking for reasons to remove people. We're not going to play along, right? That's what the courts need to do. They need to assert the independence of the Fed and make it clear that if you disagree with what the Fed is doing, you can't find reasons to get rid of them when your real reason for wanting to get rid of them is because you don't like their policies. And so that means you're clearly biased in your decision. But again, all of this is going to play out badly again in the foreign exchange markets because it calls into question the credibility. Even if, the Fed credibility was a pretense, at least we maintained the pretense. But now Donald Trump is basically showing the world that there is no independence. And what Trump is really trying to do here, see, Trump doesn't want to do anything to actually address the fundamental problems of the country, which is that we have too much debt, government is too big, government spends too much, right? He doesn't want to solve those problems. But he recognizes that we have a big problem that's getting bigger on his watch, and that is debt. The debt is exploding, and it's exploding more thanks to him. And he knows that we're in a lot of trouble because interest rates are a lot higher than they used to be, and they're headed up. And that is a big problem because we don't have the ability really to service this debt as the cost of that debt keeps going up. I mean, he says the reason he wants Powell to cut rates is because we can't afford these high rates. The country is wasting money. He says that homeowners, need lower rates, or home buyers need lower rates. We need lower mortgage rates, right? That's why he wants the Fed to cut rates. Now, of course, if the Fed does cut rates, mortgage rates are probably going to go up. The Trump administration hadn't figured that out yet. But obviously, once they get control of the Fed and they successfully cut rates, the next step is to force a return to QE. Because if the goal is to reduce long-term interest rates, cutting short-term interest rates won't work. If anything, it'll backfire, especially if it's obvious that the reason they're being cut is because of political pressure. Because inflation is going to be going up as rates are going down. The correct monetary policy is to raise rates, not cut them. The Fed isn't even considering that. Can you imagine what would happen if the Fed hiked? I mean, God. But they're not cutting. And Powell even said that. I commented about that in his last press conference. He said that by not cutting, they're already looking through the pickup in inflation, meaning that if the Fed was really paying attention to the current inflation, they would be raising rates. And the fact that they're not raising rates means they're already looking past an uptick in inflation that they should not be looking past. Why are they not raising rates? Because I think politically it's untenable. So the best they could do is not cut rates, but they're getting crucified for that. But if they do cut rates, it's going to backfire. But then the Trump administration is going to be pushing its cronies on the Fed to go back to quantitative easing because Trump wants to lower interest rates, right? That's what he wants to do. He wants to lessen the burden because he's not going to reduce the budget deficits. He's not even reducing the trade deficits. We got during the week, I think it was in July, I forget the month, but we got the merchandise trade deficit. They call it the goods trade deficit now. It's the second worst ever. There was only 1 month that was worse, and that was during the COVID reopening in 2022. So that was kind of a one-off. And that one was quite a bit bigger than this one, but this is over 100 billion. Huge number. And it was driven by, I think, a 6 or 7% spike in imports. We're importing more, and exports were down, even with the tariffs. The tariffs have done nothing to shrink our trade deficits. Now, one of the reasons our trade deficits might be going up is because the dollar is going down. And so the cost of what we import is going up because we need more dollars to buy the same quantity of stuff because the dollars are losing value. And the dollars are going to lose a lot more value, I think, in the months ahead because of what we're doing. Because Trump recognizes that we need lower interest rates, right? Because we have so much debt, right? We need lower rates. But normally, when you have a lot of debt, you get higher rates, right? That's how it works, right? The more debt you have when you go to borrow money, the higher the interest rates the lenders are going to charge you, right? Every American knows that. That's part of like the FICO score, right? If you want to get a FICO score to go out and borrow, one of the things the credit agencies look at is how much debt you have. And if you're already loaded up with debt, you don't get a higher score, right? You don't get to go to lenders and say, hey, because I have so much debt, you got to charge me a low rate of interest because I could barely afford the loans I've got. I mean, I'm struggling to get by, so you got to loan me some money real cheap because that's all I can afford. No, if you've already got a lot of debt, you're a credit risk. And so if someone's going to lend you money, more money, when you're already struggling to pay back the money you've already borrowed, they're going to charge a much higher rate because they know there's a good chance you might not pay because you got so much debt. On the other hand, if you hardly have any debt, right, because you haven't borrowed much money, and now you want to borrow some money, you're going to get a low rate because the lenders realize that you're probably going to pay them back because you don't have very much debt. So it's not that big a deal, right? So we've got all this debt, yet Donald Trump thinks we're entitled to extra low rates because we have so much debt, when it's actually the opposite. We should be paying a premium because of how much debt we have, because we're a riskier borrower, and not necessarily that we're going to default, which we still might do, but that we're going to inflate, which we will definitely do. And so when Trump forces the Fed to cut interest rates because we want lower rates, what message is he sending to the lenders, right? There's an expression, it takes two to tango. And that's true with borrowing. You need a lender, right? And so there are two parties here. There's the borrower and there's the lender. Yes, as the borrower, America wants lower rates. But what about the lenders? Do they want lower rates? No, they want higher rates. Why do they need higher rates? Well, because there's risk, higher risk because we have so much debt. But if you are lending the U.S. government money, you're not doing a favor to the government. You're expecting a return, right? You're taking some risk, even if you think it's modest, because you think the government is, pristine credit, which it doesn't have. I mean, our debt has already been downgraded. I mean, and it could get downgraded a lot more. But when you're loaning money, you expect to get a return. Well, if the Fed lowers interest rates, the rates are going to be below even the official rate of inflation. See, Trump says we should have 1% interest rates. Well, inflation, even the way the government measures it, is at least 3%. Well, how are we going to have 1% interest rates when inflation is 3%? That means if you loan the government money, you lose 2% a year. Well, who the hell wants to do that, right? Why make a loan when you can't possibly profit from the loan, that you're going to be worse off? Why part with your money? When you loan your money out, you could have spent the money yourself, but you loaned it to somebody else, and now they're using your money. Well, they're supposed to pay you for the privilege of using your money. If they're not going to pay you, you might as well use the money yourself. The reason you make a loan is to get interest, right? Because then you can spend the interest and the principal later and end up with more. But if you're going to end up with less, if you're going to loan money and you're not even going to get paid interest that equals the rate of inflation, then what the hell are you loaning the money for? So you could buy less in the future? You're supposed to loan money out so you could buy more in the future. That's why you wait. Hey, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to spend my money now. I'm going to loan it out, and then I'm going to spend it later with all the interest I earn. I'm going to buy more stuff. But if you're not going to get enough interest to equal what you lose to inflation, then no, you're not going to loan it out. Either you're going to find somebody else to loan it to who will pay you more, or you'll just spend the money yourself, right? And so when the Fed is going to cut rates, it's going to scare off the lenders, especially the ones that are outside the United States, because they pay particular attention to the exchange rate of the dollar. Let's say the dollar is falling by 5 or 10% a year. Could be falling by a lot more than that. If you're in Europe, are you going to lend the U.S. government money and collect 2% interest if the dollar is going to lose 5 or 10% of its value against the euro? Of course not. You're going to take a hit. right? So, yes, Trump wants lower interest rates to save us money, but the lenders won't lend to us at lower interest rates because they don't want to lose money. That is the box that we're in. So the only way that we can have lower interest rates in America with soaring deficits and rising inflation and a weak dollar is if the Fed does all the lending. That means massive quantitative easing. And that means runaway inflation. And that's really what the Trump administration is pounding the table that it wants. Even though Donald Trump ran against inflation, Biden inflation was bad, I'm going to wipe out inflation. The policies that he is advocating are the most inflationary policies in U.S. history. This is the reality of the situation. Donald Trump wants massive deficit spending to be financed by, debt monetization by a Federal Reserve that he controls. So he wants to officially make America a banana republic. The only problem is we don't really have any bananas, right? So we're a banana republic without bananas, which might mean we're worse. But this is the direction that we're headed in. And that's why people are selling the dollar. Now, right now, people are walking away from the dollar. By next year, if we go back to QE, they'll be running for the dollar as fast as they can. And so that's why, you don't want to wait, right? Read the writing that's on the wall, right? Newmont Mining isn't going to be the number one performing gold stock stock in the S&P by accident. When precious metals stocks are the number one performing stocks, certainly there's no sector that's beating precious metals this year. That's not a good thing, right? It's not a healthy market when precious metals are the leading sector, right? And, it's getting no coverage, too. That's one of the things. If you watch the Peter Schiff podcast, yeah, you know about the gold stocks. I've been talking about them for years now. But the mainstream financial media, they're not even talking about them now. They barely talked about them yesterday as they're making new highs. They barely talked about gold as gold is making all-time record highs. I still remember when I went on CNBC back when they still had me on. I hadn't been on like 10 years. I don't know. I can't remember when I was on. But when I used to be on every week, but when I first started going on, I was on Squawk Box, and the host was this guy, Mark Haynes, who passed away quite some time ago now. But the first time I was on, of course, I discussed the price of gold, and I think it was still below 300, or maybe it was in the low 300s. I forget. But I came back, I don't know, a few weeks later, and I'm in the studio again talking to Mark Haynes. And I said, Mark, gold's up about $40 since the last time I was in this studio. And his response to me was, who cares? Who cares about the price of gold? And, he mentioned a number of things where he cares about the price. But he says, I forget, maybe it was bread or oil, I forget. But he said, why should I care about the price of gold? Right? He is the anchor in a financial news show. It's supposed to be focusing on finance, investing, economics. And he says, who cares about the price of gold? How could you not care about the price of gold? Only if you just don't understand what gold is. Gold is money. It's you're a show about money. How could you not care about gold? And when the price of gold is going up, especially like this, it is a warning. It is telling you that there's a problem, right? Even Alan Greenspan, I talked about this, he used to use gold as his primary reference to know whether or not he was too loose or too tight. He used to say that if gold gets up near 400, I'm too loose. If it goes below 300, I'm too tight. Now, what does that say? Look where we are now, 34.50. We've been too loose for decades based on Greenspan's metric. But the gold is the most important price. It's not just a precious metal. It's not just a commodity. It's a monetary metal. Central banks are holding gold for a reason, right? How could you say, I don't care about the price of gold? Well, what about all these central banks that are hoarding all this gold? Don't you think that's significant? Because, they're not stockpiling other commodities. They're owning gold for a reason. It is the single most important price out there. And right now it is screaming that there is a huge problem. There is something rotten in the state of America. And that's what you're seeing in the gold market. And, I'm sure that mentality still exists today. The same one that Mark Haynes had, even though he's not around anymore. I think that idea that who cares about the price of gold, right? What's the big deal? It's nothing, right? It's just a rock, right? They care a lot more about Bitcoin than they do about gold. But if you understand what gold is saying, it is a warning. And it's a warning that you had better heed and that you better react to. You better get out of dollars. You better get into gold and silver. That's what the central banks are doing, right? Follow their lead, right? They ought to know. They're like the insiders in the fiat money system, right? So if you see in a company, if all the managers are dumping their shares, they might know something that you don't. Well, this is basically what's happening. The managers of the fiat monetary system are dumping their dollars. They want out. And they're buying gold. They're not buying other currencies. They don't want another fiat currency. They want real money. You should do the same thing. And the same thing is happening with investors. Not necessarily in gold, but they're dumping their U.S. shares and they're buying back their own stock. Right? That's why, my dividend payers fund is almost up 40% on the year now. It's at 39%. It's on the high of the year because value international dividend paying stocks, that's where people are putting their money now. That's where when they sell in their U.S. stocks and they sell their dollars, they're bringing their money home and they're buying value. They're buying income, right? They're buying these dividend paying stocks. I think we're still early in this trend. So again, you want to go to the Europe Pacific website, europac.com, and talk to my representatives about how we can help build a portfolio for you, manage a portfolio of foreign stocks, value and dividend paying stocks. And we also have portfolios where we manage in gold mining stocks, which, we're early in this bull market. I think we're just starting the second leg, right? The first leg was just a pure wall of worry. Nobody was investing. Everybody was scared. Everybody thought gold was about to crash. So nobody wanted to buy gold mining stocks because no one believed in the rally. I think now you're getting institutions finally starting to recognize that the rally was real, that gold prices aren't going to crash, that maybe $3,400 gold is the price. And that means gold mining stocks are way too cheap because they're priced for much lower gold prices because everybody expected gold to collapse. But eventually, not only are investors going to realize that gold's not going to crash, but that it's going much higher. And that's when you're really going to start to see the bids coming into these gold stocks. But as I've been saying on my podcast, the action over the last few weeks has been great because the gold stocks are now leading the metal. Gold is really barely up over the last 4 months because we just barely took out the high. But during that time period, gold stocks are almost up 30%. Get about a 30% move in gold stocks as gold itself was going sideways. Well, now gold is broken out, and I expect another big up move. And if gold stocks were this strong with gold going sideways, imagine how much stronger they're going to be when gold resumes its uptrend. Right? So I think that by the end of the year, we could be up well over 100% on the GDX for the year. We still have a lot of time left in 2025, and this is already the best year that these gold stocks have had, probably since the 1970s, I guess. But there wasn't a GDX back then, so it's probably the best year in the history of that ETF, right? And if all the ETFs, it probably gets the least amount of coverage. So go to the Schiff Europac website, europac.com. And again, you can buy my mutual funds, the 5 mutual funds. You can buy these at any discount broker. And we have information as well as the ticker symbols and prospectuses on these funds. You can get it all on my website at europac.com when you go into the funds. But it's not too late. We're still very, very early in the scheme of things. Even though I've been buying these stocks for a long time, you can say, how could it be early? It's just early in this bull market. I was buying it before the bull market, although there are a lot of stocks that are 10 times what I bought them years ago. But that's not the average stock. There are some stocks that have done great, but a lot of stocks have gone sideways. But I think that's all about to change. Just about every stock that I own in the sector hit a new, not only a 52-week high on Friday, but a decade high or more. So we're seeing across-the-board strength in these stocks. The one thing that still hasn't moved are the little ones, the real juniors, although they're starting to move, but they have a long way to go. I think that's going to really supercharge the Euro-Pacific Gold Fund, because we have a really nice position established in those smaller companies that are very, very hard to buy. Also, don't forget, again, as I said earlier, go to the Schiff Gold YouTube channel, subscribe to that. I'm going to be doing more of these weekly gold market wraps, because I expect a lot more big weeks in gold and silver, just like the one that we had last week. So I want to make sure everybody stays abreast, in particular on what's going on in precious metals. And hopefully the fence sitters get off the fence. A lot of people have been saying, hey, it's too high. I don't want to buy. I got to wait for a pullback. And I've been saying, don't wait. You're not going to get one that's going to be worth your while. You got to buy the highs. If you're not willing to buy the highs, you're not going to buy, because the highs are going to keep getting higher and higher and higher. So you might as well buy now instead of buy later and pay more. And don't forget, again, go to Schiff Sovereign. If you're not currently reading the Schiff Sovereign newsletter, make sure and subscribe by going to our website and signing up. Anyway, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their holiday weekend, the official end of summer. I think we're going to have a big week in the markets next week, and I think an even bigger fall. So make sure you're prepared for what's going to happen and take action. But enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye for now.